What do you think makes for great sex?
Great sex is apocalyptic. There is no such thing as great sex unless you have an apocalyptic moment. William Burroughs once changed the course of American literature with one sentence. He said, "I see God in my asshole in the flashbulb of orgasm." Now that was one incredible sentence because it came at the end of the Eisenhower period, printed around 1959 in Big Table in Chicago. I remember reading it and thinking, I can't believe I just read those words. I can't tell you the number of taboos. I can't tell you the number of taboos it violated. First of all, you weren't supposed to connect God with sex. Second of all, you never spoke of the asshole. Certainly not in relation to sex. If you did, you were the lowest form of pervert. Third of all, there was obvious homosexuality. In the remark. In those days, nobody was accustomed to seeing that in print. And fourth, there was an ugly technological edge. Why do you have to bring in flashbulbs? Was that the nature of his orgasm? It was the first time anybody had ever spoken about the inner nature of the orgasm.
A graphic representation of a sexual act become art, and when smut. Can you suggest any criteria on which to base a judgment?
Let me ask you, what would be your idea of smut?
Things that are particularly degrading to either sex.
Get specific.
I guess it's stuff that turns me on a way that I think I shouldn't be turned on.
Excellent.
I feel the difference is if it's commercially and sloppily done just to get another page in the book, then the insult is to the art. Where it's a true and honest representation of feeling, then no matter what it represents, it's got to be respected.
That's very well put, too. You would be saying, in effect then, Laura, that smut is the equivalent of a sexual act that's casual, what we call sordid, no love, no real pleasure in it, a cohabitation with a rancid smell to it. So a lack of respect for the seriousness of the occasion when a photographer takes a picture of a woman in a pornographic position makes for smut. And Jeffrey is saying, as I gather, that there are certain acts that tend toward the bestial, the fecal. I assume these are the sort of things you're thinking of, that may be arousing, but you find that your moral nature disapproves.
I'm wondering, is smut to pornography, to good pornography, as trashy romance novels are to literature? Is it just the lower end of the genre?
It's certainly complicated. Take Laura's criteria, pictures that are transparently cynical, the model's worn out, the photographer's worn out, disgusting. Yet that can be arousing in a funny way. For instance, in Hustler, often I find that the most interesting section is those cheap Polaroid pictures that untalented photographers send of women who are not models.
The reality turns you on?
The sordid reality. My sexuality, I expect, is aroused by knowledge. The moment I know more than I knew before, I'm excited. Those gritty Polaroid shots in Hustler are often more interesting. They communicate. You know, the picture of some waitress who lives in Sioux Falls. I know more at that moment about Sioux Falls, about waitresses, even if they're lying, even if she isn't a waitress. There's something about the very manifest of the lie that's fascinating. It arouses your curiosity. Whereas superb pictures of models can get boring. There tends to be a sameness in them. Aren't enough flaws present? The very question of the sordid is tricky.
So, have you been sexually pursued by literary groupies? What's it like being fucked as an image rather than as a person?
Well, I've usually been drawn to women who aren't necessarily that interested in my work. My present wife had read one book of mine before we met. She hardly knew anything about me. It's probably analogous to the poor rich girl who wants to be loved for herself and not her money. Remember all those movies?
In Woody Allen's movie, Annie Hall, he's in the street and he walks up to this little old lady and he says to her something like, "Why are relationships so difficult?" And she says, "Love fades." As a man who's had 6 marriages, what's your reaction to this dialogue? Do you think that love fades? Do you feel that sex fades?
I don't think that sex fades in marriage necessarily. Without talking about my personal life, I'd say that compatibility is nearer to the problem than sex. And what I mean is people can have marvelous sex and not be terribly compatible. That sets up a great edginess in marriage. Some people, in fact, can only have good sex with people who are essentially incompatible with them. I might have been in that category for years. I don't know. If you're terribly combative, then you're drawn towards mates who are not too compatible. Anyone who has a violent or ugly or competitive edge, or anyone who has a violent or ugly or combative. Yes. Thank you, Jeffrey. Anyone who has a violent or ugly or combative edge is not going to be comfortable with someone who is really sweet and submissive. They want something more abrasive in their daily life. Otherwise, they are likely to lose their good opinion of themselves. There's nothing worse than being brutal to somebody who's good to you. Whereas if you're living with someone whose ideas irritate the living shit out of you, and you fight with them every day and feel justified about it, that can be healthier than living with a soul whose ideas are compatible to yours. All the same, if you do choose this fundamental incompatibility, there will come a point where it ceases to be fun and turns into its opposite. Faults in the mate that were half charming suddenly become unendurable. Every one of us who has been in love knows how fragile, what's a good word for skin? How fragile is the membrane of love. It has to be mended every day and nurtured. We have to anticipate all the places where it's getting a little weak and go there and breathe on it, shape it again. In a combative relationship, obviously that's difficult. You have to have a great animal vigor between combative people, or they just can't make it for long.
What about love fading?
Well, I don't think love fades. I don't think there's anything automatic about it. I think most of us aren't good enough for love. I think self-pity is probably the most rewarding single emotion in the world for masturbators, which is one of the reasons, I suppose, I'm opposed to masturbation, because it encourages other vices to collect around you. Self-pity is one of the first. You lie in bed, pull off, and say to yourself, I have such wonderful, beautiful, tender, sweet, deep, romantic, exciting and sensual emotions. Why is it that no woman can appreciate how absolutely fabulous I am? Why can't I offer these emotions to someone else? Self-pity comes rolling in and cuts us off from recognizing that love is a reward. Love is not something that is going to come up and solve your problems. Love is something you get after you've solved enough of your problems so that something in providence itself takes pity on you. I always believed that whoever or whatever it is, some angel, some sour sort of our angel finally says, look at these poor motherfuckers. He and she have been working so hard for so many years. Let's throw him or her a bone. So they meet and find love. Then they have to know what to do with it.
Yeah.
I'll be okay. Just give me a minute.
Wow.
Yeah.
You rolling? Love is a function of having paid your dues?
Truman Capote has got this book he's writing, Answered Prayers. I gather from something he said once that its theme is that the worst thing that befalls people is that their prayers are answered, which is not a cheap idea.